To escape my fake, perfect life as an influencer, I fell for a bartender from the ghetto. He was my one real secret. The night I decided to leave my fiancé for him, he showed me a video he'd secretly recorded of us in bed. He didn't want my love, he wanted $50,000. The Atlanta sun was a thick, humid blanket, filtering through the broad leaves of the magnolia trees and dappling the perfect Buckhead lawn in nervous patterns of light. I sat on the terrace of a cafe so trendy it hurt, my phone propped carefully against a vase of fresh peonies, the small red live icon glowing in the corner. My smile was a practiced, brilliant thing, beamed out to the 2 million people who had chosen to watch my brunch. I was talking about the life-altering benefits of a spirulina smoothie, my voice a carefully modulated chirp of enthusiasm. Across the table, Bradley, my fiancé, was the perfect southern prop. He dissected his steak with a lazy grace that bespoke old money and a lifetime of effortless privilege. His Ralph Lauren polo was a blinding white against his professionally maintained tan, and the watch on his wrist was worth more than the car most people drive. Every single element of this scene was a deliberate composition, a piece of content designed for maximum engagement. From the hashtag blessed I had already scheduled to post, to the precise angle of my hand so the sunlight would catch the diamond on my finger. This wasn't a life, it was a brand partnership. I continued my monologue for the camera, the words flowing with the ease of a script learned long ago. And tonight, Bradley and I are heading to the charity auction, I chirped, making sure to pan the camera slightly to include his handsome, indifferent profile. It's just so important to give back to those who are less fortunate, you know? He offered a curt, practiced nod, never looking up from his meal. He understood his role perfectly. He was the aspirational accessory, the final piece of my perfect puzzle. The moment I tapped the end broadcast button, the smile fell from my face like a mask. The sudden weight of my own performance pressed down on me, leaving a hollow ache behind my eyes. I leaned back in the wicker chair, the curated energy draining out of me, replaced by a flat, familiar exhaustion. The chirpy, wellness-obsessed girl from the screen vanished, and in her place was just me, Taylor, a 20-year-old who felt ancient. The world seemed to rush back in, the sounds of the cafe suddenly louder, the sunlight harsher. My fingers, acting on pure, conditioned instinct, immediately moved to open the app, to check the numbers, the comments, the validation that I still existed. But I stopped. My attention was snagged by the lock screen, by a notification that didn't belong. It was a message from an unknown number, a ghost in my meticulously managed machine. There was no name, no greeting, no digital pleasantry. Just 3 words, stark and demanding against the pastel wallpaper of my phone's background. The words were a gunshot in the serene, sun-drenched quiet of my life. A raw, jagged edge against the smooth, polished surface of my day. They didn't fit with the peonies, the diamond ring, or the boy across the table who was now scrolling through his own phone, utterly oblivious. The message held a different kind of promise, a different kind of reality that I kept locked away from the light. Tonight. Same bar. The Iron Oak was located in a part of Atlanta that Bradley's real estate buddies referred to, with a dismissive wave of the hand, as transitional. That was the polite term. The real term was ungentrified. Down here, the thick, sweet scent of magnolias and jasmine was choked out by the smells of damp asphalt, sizzling chicken from 100 storefront fryers, and the faint, acrid tang of exhaust. The air was heavier, filled with the sounds of bass-heavy music thumping from passing cars and conversations shouted across porches. It was a different city, one that existed in the shadows of the gleaming Buckhead towers. I parked my G-Wagon, a ridiculous, snow-white tank, 2 blocks away on a side street where it looked like a spaceship that had landed by mistake. Pulling the hood of a nondescript gray sweatshirt over my salon-perfect blonde hair was the first step in a transformation. I shed Taylor, the brand, and became someone else, someone anonymous. I was an imposter in my own life, but here, disguised and out of place, I felt a strange sense of authenticity. I slipped my phone into my pocket, a conscious severing of the digital leash, and walked toward the bar's dimly lit door. Inside, the world went dark and cool. The sudden change from the bright, humid street was a physical relief. A low, mournful soul song bled from an old jukebox, the singer's voice full of a pain and longing that was a universe away from the curated optimism of my playlists. The few patrons scattered at the small tables and along the bar seemed rooted to their seats, part of the worn, dark wood and faded upholstery. No one looked up when I entered. Here, anonymity was the default currency, and for that, I was grateful. And then I saw him. He was behind the bar, a towel slung over his shoulder, his back to the room as he polished a glass with slow, deliberate motions. Darius. He was the absolute, magnetic opposite of my polished, manicured world. Even from behind, you could see the power in his frame, the clean lines of muscle in his shoulders and back that weren't for show, that weren't sculpted by a personal trainer in a sterile gym. When he turned, placing the gleaming glass on a shelf, the dim light caught the planes of his face and the deep, honey-brown color of his skin. His movements were fluid and economical, holding a quiet confidence that radiated through the room. There was a stillness about him, the calm of a man who had seen things and had nothing left to prove to anyone. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept over the room and found me standing just inside the door. There was no smile, no effusive greeting. That wasn't his way. It wasn't our way. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward the empty booth in the far corner, the one shrouded in the deepest shadows. I walked toward the booth, feeling the familiar churn of fear and exhilaration in my stomach. The worn leather of the seat was cool against my skin. He finished what he was doing and then moved from behind the bar, bringing 2 bottles of beer, the labels already sweating in the warm air. He set one in front of me and then slid into the seat opposite, the space between us suddenly charged, alive with everything we never said. This was our ritual. No questions, no small talk. He never asked about my world of hashtags and fake smiles. He never asked about the diamond ring I always made sure to slip into my pocket before I got out of the car, or about the man who had put it there. He didn't care about the 2 million followers who thought they knew me. In this bar, with him, that person didn't exist. And I, in turn, never asked about his life beyond these 4 walls. I didn't ask about the faded scar that traced the line of his jaw or the weariness that sometimes settled deep in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Our connection was built in that negative space. What drew us together was a primal, unspoken recognition. We were both wearing masks, performers in our own lives. Mine was a glittering, fragile thing, constructed from designer clothes and Instagram filters, a mask of relentless, exhausting perfection. His was different. It was forged from something harder, something I could only guess at. It was a mask of stoicism, of survival, built to hide the scars of a life I couldn't possibly comprehend. But in the silence of this shadowy booth, we allowed each other to take them off. He took a long drink from his beer, his eyes never leaving my face. His gaze wasn't invasive or judgmental, it was just, observant. He saw through the carefully applied makeup, the expensive haircut, the faint sheen of anxiety I couldn't scrub away. With him, I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to be bubbly or charming or grateful. I could just be. The silence wasn't awkward, it was a language all its own. It was a shared respite from the noise of our separate worlds. The soul song on the jukebox ended, and for a moment, the only sounds were the clink of glasses and the low murmur of conversation from the bar. I picked at the label on my beer bottle, the damp paper shredding under my fingernail. He reached across the table, his fingers briefly covering mine. His touch was warm and firm, his skin slightly rough. It was a simple, grounding gesture, a silent question and a silent answer all in one. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, a reminder of the dangerous, magnetic pull that kept bringing me back to this place. Here, in the dark, I wasn't a product to be sold or an image to be maintained. I was just a girl, sitting across from a man, in a bar where no one knew my name. This was the most honest place in my life. And that fact was both a profound comfort and a terrifying indictment of the beautiful, glittering lie I would have to return to when the night was over. The pressure began to mount, a slow, hydraulic squeeze from all sides. Bradley, who had once been a charmingly passive part of my brand, was becoming more demanding, more proprietary. Our wedding, less than 6 months away, was his new project. He approached it like a corporate merger, with spreadsheets for flower arrangements and conference calls with cake designers. He was planning an event, a spectacle for our social circle, and I was merely the star attraction, a commodity whose input was secondary to the overall production value. At the same time, my sponsors, the brands that paid for my perfect life, were increasing their demands. The market was saturated with pretty girls in pretty places, they needed more. They wanted authenticity, a word that had become a sick joke to me. They wanted videos of Bradley and me having real moments, blog posts about our journey to the altar. I was being paid to manufacture a reality that was slipping further and further away from anything remotely true. My life had become a performance piece, and I was forgetting where the stage ended and I began. The breaking point, when it came, was absurdly mundane. It was a Tuesday evening, and Bradley and I were arguing, or rather, he was lecturing and I was silently screaming, about the exact shade of ivory for the cocktail napkins at the reception. He had a swatch book spread out on our gleaming marble island, his brow furrowed with an intensity he usually reserved for stock market fluctuations. "Champagne ivory is too yellow, Taylor," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "It will clash with the ecru white of the tablecloths. Don't you see?" I stared at the 30 nearly identical shades of white and felt the air leave my lungs. I was suffocating. The pristine, climate-controlled air of our Buckhead condo suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. The argument wasn't about napkins. It was about control, about the slow, systematic erasure of my own will. I looked at this handsome, successful man, the man my 2 million followers adored, and I felt nothing but a profound, terrifying emptiness. I turned without a word, walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my car keys from the bowl by the door, and left. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape the crushing weight of all that perfect, meaningless white. My car seemed to drive itself, my hands guiding the wheel on instinct, away from the manicured lawns and silent, imposing mansions of my neighborhood. I was heading south, toward the grit and noise of the real city. But my usual destination, the dark, comforting anonymity of the Iron Oak, didn't feel right. It wasn't far enough away. I needed something more anonymous, more final. A place where my two worlds couldn't possibly overlap. I pulled off the highway, drawn in by the lurid, flickering glow of a neon sign. It was a motel, the kind of place you only see from the interstate, a sad, lonely outpost for truckers and travelers with no better options. Its name, the Starlight Inn, was a cruel joke under the starless, hazy Atlanta sky. The red neon vacancy sign blinked erratically, a frantic, failing heartbeat. I paid in cash, using a name I made up on the spot, the feel of the worn bills a novelty in my credit card world. The room smelled of chlorine and something vaguely desperate, a scent that felt more honest than the expensive, cloying potpourri in my own home. I stood at the grimy window, watching the endless stream of headlights flowing past on the interstate, each one a self-contained world, a life I knew nothing about. They were free, moving toward a destination, while I was stuck, trapped in a gilded cage. I took out my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. No words of explanation, no pleading. That wasn't what this was about. I simply opened a map, dropped a pin on my location, and sent it to him. It was a summons, a distress signal, an act of pure, reckless faith. The wait was agonizing. For 20 minutes, I paced the thin, stained carpet, the silence of the room broken only by the rumble of passing trucks. A part of me expected him not to come. Why should he? I was a complication, a tourist in his world. But then, there was a soft, firm knock on the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I opened it, and he was there, his large frame filling the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim hallway light. He looked from me to the cheap, anonymous room, but his expression didn't change. He simply stepped inside, and I closed the door behind him, shutting out everything else. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He came to stand behind me as I turned back to the window, the hypnotic flow of traffic a safe place to rest my eyes. His hands came to rest on my shoulders, his touch firm and grounding. The simple, solid weight of his hands was an anchor in the storm of my emotions. I leaned back into his presence, a silent surrender. In the sterile quiet of that room, stripped of all our usual pretenses, the space between us vibrated with a raw, unspoken understanding. His touch was the only language we needed. It wasn't a prelude to passion, but an act of profound comfort, a response to a pain he couldn't have known but somehow understood. His hands kneaded the tight muscles in my shoulders, a slow, deliberate release of the tension I had been carrying for months. It was a gesture of pure, uncomplicated care, and it was more intimate than any kiss. This was our point of no return, the moment a clandestine escape tipped over into something vital and necessary. The shrill, insistent buzz of my phone on the nightstand shattered the quiet. The screen lit up with Bradley's name, a digital leash pulling me back to the world I had just fled. I looked from the phone to Darius's reflection in the dark window. His gaze was steady, his expression unchanged. In that moment, the choice was so clear it was brutal. I walked to the nightstand, and with a single, deliberate motion, I swept the phone to the floor. The sound of the screen shattering on the cheap linoleum was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. It was the soundtrack to my rebellion. My secret was no longer a secret. It was my only reality. That night at the Starlight Inn, with the sound of my shattering phone, had changed the dynamic. Our secret was no longer just a release valve for the pressure of my public life, it had become the central, governing force. The abstract fear of being discovered, which had once been a low-level hum in the background, now became a sharp, tangible threat. Every text message I sent him felt like a risk, every stolen hour a gamble. The secrecy was a weight, but it was also a thrill, a constant, electric current humming just beneath the surface of my skin. The danger crystallized into a single, heart-stopping moment one hazy afternoon. We were leaving that same motel, stepping out from the dim, anonymous room into the unforgiving brightness of the day. For a moment, lost in the afterglow of our time together, we let our guards down. He was laughing, a rare, deep sound that made my chest ache, and I was looking up at him, feeling utterly exposed and completely safe all at once. It was in that moment of vulnerability that a familiar blue sedan drove past, slowly enough for me to see the driver's face clearly. My blood ran cold. It was a girl named Ashley, one of my most dedicated followers. She ran a fan account, at Taylor_Daily, and her comments on my posts were a constant stream of breathless adoration. She was the last person on earth I would ever want to see me here, emerging from a seedy motel with a man who was decidedly not my fiancé. I reacted instinctively, spinning away and hiding my face in the collar of my jacket, but it was too late. I knew she had seen me. I felt her recognition like a physical blow. The rest of the day was a self-inflicted torture. I was a wreck of paranoia, my thumb compulsively refreshing every social media feed, my stomach twisting into knots with every notification. I was waiting for the digital guillotine to fall, for a blurry photo to appear on Twitter or a cryptic post on Ashley's account. I imagined the comments, the accusations, the gleeful destruction of my carefully crafted image. But there was nothing. The internet remained silent. Ashley posted a picture of her latte, captioned with a heart emoji. The bullet had missed. That near miss should have scared me straight. It should have been the wake-up call that sent me running back to the safety of my gilded cage. But it did the opposite. The shared adrenaline, the terror of that moment, fused us together in a way our quiet, stolen hours never had. The risk wasn't a deterrent, it became the point. The danger was a drug, and we were both addicted to the high. We were partners in a high-stakes crime, and the conspiracy of it all was more intoxicating than any passion. Our meetings became less frequent, but more desperate, more charged. We abandoned the relative safety of the motels and sought out places that were truly hidden, liminal spaces on the forgotten edges of the city. We met in the hollowed-out shells of abandoned warehouses, the air thick with the dust of decay, our whispers swallowed by the vast, empty spaces. We'd meet late at night in deserted public parks, the swings creaking eerily in the breeze, the distant city lights a reminder of the world we were hiding from. Each encounter was a tightrope walk over a canyon of consequences. We were playing with fire, and the constant threat of being burned only made us lean closer to the flames. We never spoke of the future, never made promises. Our connection existed only in these stolen, high-stakes moments. The silence between us, once a comfort, was now filled with a different kind of tension, the unspoken understanding of what we both stood to lose. It was a beautiful, terrifying, and completely unsustainable way to live. One night, the storm that had been brewing inside me finally broke. We were parked in his old Chevy, hidden down a dirt road as a summer thunderstorm, the kind that can only happen in Georgia, raged around us. The rain was a solid, deafening sheet against the windshield, and flashes of lightning illuminated the car's interior in stark, ghostly strobes. In one of those flashes, I saw his face, his expression unreadable as he watched the storm, and a sudden, overwhelming panic seized me. The silence, the lack of questions, the carefully constructed walls we had built around our affair, it all suddenly felt like a void. I was risking everything for a man I didn't truly know. The carefully compartmentalized nature of our relationship, once a comfort, now felt like a terrifying liability. The words tumbled out of me before I could stop them, a raw, desperate plea against the roar of the storm. "Who are you, Darius?" My voice was small, swallowed by the thunder, but he heard me. He didn't answer right away. He just continued to stare out at the violent, beautiful chaos of the storm, as if the answer was written in the lightning. The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. I held my breath, bracing myself for a deflection, an evasion, or worse, the truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and quiet, a calm center in the heart of the storm. It was a voice that could make you believe anything. "I'm the one who helps you breathe," he said, turning to look at me, his eyes dark and serious in the flickering light. "When your perfect world is trying to suffocate you." It wasn't a full answer. It wasn't a confession or a life story. It told me nothing and everything all at once. It was exactly what I needed to hear. It reframed our affair not as a sordid betrayal, but as an act of survival, with him as my silent, steadfast rescuer. And in that moment, with the storm raging outside, I chose to believe him. It was a more comforting lie than the one I was living every day. The illusion of control I'd been clinging to finally shattered. Bradley, rummaging through my car for a pair of sunglasses, found the smashed, useless remains of my old phone tucked under the passenger seat. The discovery triggered an explosion. His anger wasn't about the phone itself, he could buy me 100 more, it was about the deception, the secrecy it represented. The argument was ugly, a torrent of accusations and questions I couldn't answer. His voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was sharp with a possessive fury that terrified me. His ultimatum hung in the air of our pristine, silent apartment long after he'd stormed out. "Figure out what the hell is going on with you, Taylor, or we're done." The threat wasn't just about losing him, it was about the implosion of my entire, carefully constructed world. The brand, the sponsors, the 2 million followers, it was all predicated on the fairy tale romance. I was standing on a precipice, the ground crumbling away beneath my feet. And in that moment of pure panic, only one name, one face, offered any kind of solace. I had to see Darius. I drove to the Iron Oak with a reckless urgency, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I was no longer running from my life, I was running toward a decision. The double life had become an untenable, crushing weight. I was ready to confess everything to Bradley, to end the engagement, to face the fallout. I was ready to choose the grit and the silence, the authenticity I found only with Darius. I was choosing him. The thought was terrifying, but it was also a profound relief, the first truly honest decision I had made in years. The bar was closed when I arrived, the windows dark, a single dim light glowing from within. I used the key he'd given me weeks ago, a silent acknowledgement of the space I now occupied in his life. The familiar scent of stale beer and old wood wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. He was waiting for me, standing behind the bar as he so often was. But as I walked toward him, the relief that had buoyed me on the drive over began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, creeping unease. Something was wrong. The usual warmth in his eyes, the quiet welcome I had come to depend on, was gone. In its place was a hard, dispassionate stillness I had never seen before. He was watching me approach not as a lover, but as an opponent. His posture was tense, his expression shuttered and unreadable. He looked like a poker player about to lay down a winning hand, a man who had already calculated all the odds and knew the outcome of the game. My steps faltered, the words I had practiced dying in my throat. "I know how to solve your problems," he said, his voice a flat, unfamiliar monotone. The words were a bucket of ice water, shocking me into silence. He wasn't responding to my unspoken turmoil, he was initiating a move of his own. And mine, too. He placed his phone on the polished surface of the bar, the screen facing me. His thumb swiped across the glass, and then he tapped play. My world, which had been teetering on the edge for weeks, finally plunged into the abyss. It was a video. The quality was grainy, the lighting poor, shot from a high angle in the corner of a room. But there was no mistaking the location. It was the cheap, anonymous motel room from that first night, the one with the stained carpet and the flickering neon sign. And there was no mistaking the two figures on the bed. It was us. The audio was muffled, indistinct, but our actions were brutally, undeniably clear. Every secret touch, every whispered word, every moment of raw, desperate connection had been recorded. The blood drained from my face, a cold, sickening rush that left me dizzy and nauseous. I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. This act of rebellion, this moment of pure, unvarnished truth, had been a performance for a hidden lens. The sanctuary I had found in his arms had been a trap. My most vulnerable moment had been captured, catalogued, and saved. I stared at the moving images, at the girl on the screen who looked like me but was a stranger, and I felt a violation so profound it was like a physical blow. "What is this?" The words were a whisper, a thread of sound in the crushing silence of the bar. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, from the grotesque spectacle of my own betrayal. He didn't flinch. He didn't show a flicker of remorse or shame. He just watched my reaction, his face a cold, impassive mask. He had planned this. He had been waiting for the right moment, for my desperation to reach its peak. He had been waiting for me to be fully, completely broken. "That," he said, his voice as cold and hard as the bar top between us, "is my ticket out of here." He finally met my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw not a lover, not a rescuer, but a predator. The quiet strength I had mistaken for wisdom was just a ruthless, calculating patience. The silence I had interpreted as understanding was just the absence of a conscience. "And for you," he continued, the words twisting the knife, "it's the price of your freedom." He named his price without blinking. $50,000. The number was both absurdly large and insultingly small. It was a fortune to him, a way out of the life I had romanticized. To my family, to Bradley, it was a rounding error, the cost of a weekend getaway. It was the price tag he had placed on my soul. "You pay me," he said, laying out the terms of my surrender, "and I disappear from your life. And this video disappears with me." The concrete cage of my perfect world, the one I had been so desperate to escape, was now closing in around me, and the man I had trusted with my escape held the only key. The initial shock was a physical thing, a wave of icy cold that started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. But it quickly burned away, replaced by something clean and cold, fury. I stared at him, at the man I had stripped myself bare for, emotionally and physically, and I searched his eyes for a flicker of the person I thought I knew. I was looking for the man who had watched thunderstorms with me, whose silent presence had been my only sanctuary. There was nothing. Just a hard, calculating emptiness. "You wouldn't dare," I breathed, the words barely a whisper. The threat was so ludicrous, so monstrous, that my mind couldn't fully grasp it. He let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place. People like me, Taylor, we don't have choices. We just have opportunities, he said, his voice level and calm. And people like you have everything to lose. The casual cruelty of it, the way he defined our world so simply and brutally, was more devastating than any shout. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the bar, my movements stiff and robotic. The familiar door, the one I had slipped through so many times with a fluttering heart, now felt like the gate of a prison. The night air, thick with the smell of rain and exhaust, didn't revive me. I got into my car, the luxurious leather interior feeling like a cheap movie set, and I drove away, not looking back. I had walked into that bar to choose him, I walked out having lost myself completely. The next week was a masterclass in psychological torture. My phone, once a tool of my trade and a source of constant validation, became an instrument of terror. He would text me, not with threats, but with simple, cold reminders. A bank account number. A deadline. Time is running out, Taylor. Each notification was a small, electric shock to my system. I was living in a state of suspended animation, caught between the sheer, public humiliation of exposure and the private, soul-crushing humiliation of paying for my own silence. I almost did it. On the final night, I had the bank transfer page open on my laptop, the cursor blinking over the $50,000 figure. It was a business transaction, I told myself. A crisis management fee. In my world, this is how problems were solved, with money. I could pay him, and this would all go away. I could go back to planning a wedding, to posting about smoothies, to living my beautiful, hollow life. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. It was the choice of a coward, and I was so very tired of being brave. But as my finger hovered over the confirm button, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't pride. It wasn't defiance. It was a sudden, blinding moment of clarity. He wasn't selling his silence, he was selling me back my own prison sentence. I would be paying to continue the performance, to keep the gilded cage locked from the inside. I would be a hostage to this secret forever, my freedom bought at the price of my own self-respect. I finally understood that the cage itself was the problem, not the man who was threatening to blow it open. I closed the laptop. I ignored the final, menacing text that arrived an hour later. I turned my new phone off and went to bed, falling into a dreamless, exhausted sleep for the first time in a week. I had made my choice. I had refused to pay the ransom. And the next morning, as the sun streamed through my floor-to-ceiling windows, my world detonated. It started with a single link, sent from a friend with a subject line of just OMG. I clicked it. And there it was. My most private, vulnerable moment, repackaged as a piece of sordid, viral entertainment. It was everywhere. Tabloid sites, gossip blogs, anonymous forums. It was spliced, memed, and commented on by thousands of strangers who now felt they had ownership over my body, my choices, my shame. My name, once a valuable brand, was now a synonym for hypocrisy and scandal. The comments were a river of digital poison, a mix of gleeful misogyny and righteous indignation from the very followers who had once adored my facade. The speed of the destruction was breathtaking. The emails from my sponsors started arriving within the hour. They were all variations on a theme, written in cold, corporate language that offered no comfort. Due to recent events. No longer aligns with our brand values. We will be terminating our partnership, effective immediately. Years of work, of building a brand, of curating a following, all turned to digital dust in the space of a morning coffee. The life I had sold was no longer a viable product. Bradley didn't even grant me the dignity of a final fight. I came home that afternoon to find his closets empty, a perfectly packed suitcase standing by the door. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just looked at me with a kind of weary disgust, the look a CEO gives a failing startup he's about to divest from. My father will be in touch, he said, and then he walked out. He wasn't just leaving me, he was disengaging from a bad investment, a brand that was now toxic. By evening, I was sitting in the vast, empty cavern of our condo, the silence a deafening roar. My phone, which had been exploding all day with notifications of hate and condemnation, had finally fallen quiet. The brands were gone. The followers were gone. Bradley was gone. For the first time in years, no one was demanding anything from me. There were no posts to schedule, no comments to reply to, no perfect moments to stage. I was utterly, completely alone. I picked up the silent phone, opened Instagram, and navigated to the settings page. My thumb hovered over the permanently delete account button. I thought of the 2 million followers, the years of work, the entire architecture of my identity. And then I pressed it. I did the same for Twitter, for Facebook, for my blog. One by one, I erased myself from the digital world that had created and then destroyed me. It was a quiet, methodical suicide of the person I had pretended to be. And when the last profile had vanished into the digital ether, when the last connection to that life was severed, I waited for the despair to hit. But it never came. Instead, as I sat there in the silent, empty room, a strange, unfamiliar feeling began to spread through my chest. It was lightness. The crushing weight of the performance, the constant, exhausting effort of maintaining the facade, was gone. He had taken everything, but he had also taken the burden. He thought he had destroyed me. He had taken my career, my reputation, my fiancé, my future. He had used my heart as a tool and my trust as a weapon. But in his act of calculated cruelty, he had accidentally given me the one thing I had been so desperately seeking in his arms, the one thing my money could never buy. He had given me my freedom. A real, messy, uncurated, and terrifying freedom. And that profound, unforgivable injustice was the most perfect, unexpected ending to my carefully orchestrated fairy tale.